for as long as several young Americans can remember, they've lived their whole life under the Patriot Act. Hard to believe, but it was first enacted into law by President George W. Bush on October 26, 2001. Joining us today to talk about the possible repeal of the Patriot Act finally is Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky. Thank you for joining us today, Congressman.
Thanks for having me on, Christian. Yeah, a lot of people have lived under the Patriot Act their whole life, but it's only been part of their life that they knew what they were living under. I mean, it was Edward Snowden who revealed that the mass surveillance programs. I think most of Congress didn't even know what was going on in the Patriot Act until just a few years ago.
So you and Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii have introduced H.R. 8970, the Protect Our Civil Liberties Act, that would repeal the Patriot Act. Can you tell us a little bit about the bill, some of the provisions in it, and the possibility of that passing under President Trump and signing it?
Well, we're running out of time to get it passed, so I anticipate reintroducing it. There are sections of this bill that we've actually got on the floor of the House and had a vote on that have passed as amendments to appropriations bills, and then they get stripped out in the backroom deals. But just to tell you some of the provisions that are in this bill, this is sort of our wish list of if we could make everything right, this is what we would do. So first up is repealing Section 215 of the Patriot Act. That's the section that authorizes them to basically collect all your metadata on everybody without a warrant. The second section would be to repeal the FISA Amendments Act. And that is concerning that part of the law that we want to repeal because they can actually collect your content there. So those are the first two sections. Those are I think, what people would recognize as two of the biggest dangerous sort of impediments to liberty in this country today. And then there's an assortment of other things that we do in there. For instance, Edward Snowden is the guy who has to stay overseas. If he comes back, he's going to be arrested, probably lock him up and throw away the key. But people say, oh, he should have done this the correct route. He's not a legitimate whistleblower. Well, the problem is the whistleblower statutes as they stand today don't cover contractors. And most of our government spying is done through, contractors. And sort of the tools that they use to do that are set up that way. So Edward Snowden is the rule, not the exception. And so what our bill does, the one that Tulsi and I have introduced, it also grants or extends whistleblower protection to contractors like Edward Snowden. So that's an important aspect of it. And one of the other things that I think is really important, this is one of my favorite parts of the bill, is it makes it illegal for the government to require backdoors into private software and hardware. Right now, the government can mandate sort of special keys to encryption in products. And they say this is for the public safety. We need this to unlock people's phones if we arrest them, or maybe if we think they're doing something bad. But the interesting thing is big tech, this is one of the few places where big tech is on our side, because there's nobody in Europe or Asia that wants to buy an American product that has American spyware pre-installed. Like, that's not a feature they want. The U.S. government can spy on their phones. Nobody in Europe or Asia thinks that's a benefit. And so it's actually hurt the export of our own products. It's hurt our own economy that the government has mandated these backdoors. And this provision, I think, is popular because Zoe Lofgren and I, when we sponsored this as a separate amendment to an appropriations bill, we were able to get this to pass on the floor of the House before they stripped it out later.
Absolutely. So with regards to the FISA repeal and so forth, do you think you'll get a lot of pushback from members of not just the other side of the aisle, but even from your party on this?
Oh, yeah, we get pushback all the time. It's maddening to have these debates with them. They will literally say that I'm trying to help terrorists. And nothing could be further from the truth. They will say that we need all these tools to keep Americans safe. And what I say to them is, get a warrant. I'm not trying to deprive our law enforcement or our FBI or our CIA of any of the tools that they need to go after terrorists or even to track terrorists. But if you're going to go after an American citizen in the United States, get a warrant. That's what our founding fathers said. That's what I say.
How long do you think that your colleagues that are in favor of these anti-civil liberties provisions in the Patriot Act, how long do they see the war on terror going on? Like, when is enough for them?
Oh, well, the war on terror is going to be like the war on drugs and the war in Afghanistan and now the war on COVID, the war on poverty. Once they say war on something, that's an indicator they never intend to end it.
Like a permanent government program.
It's a permanent government program. I would call it a war on our civil liberties, and that's why we call the bill Restoring Our Civil Liberties Act. So we need to end the war on our civil liberties. We need to remain vigilant against terrorists and would-be terrorists who are plotting things. But they have tools to go after them, and they can exercise those tools without infringing on the private rights of every American. You know, you hear some people say, well, I've got nothing to hide, and I figure they can hack this out of my phone anyway or off my computer anyway, but I've got nothing to hide, so I'm not worried. Well, I think you should be worried. If the government has absolute power and you may think you have nothing to hide, and that works as long as the government that's elected is your government. Once the other side gets elected, they can use information against you.
Absolutely. So this bill has been introduced in this current Congress. So come January 6th, or is it January 3rd, when the new Congress is sworn in, does that mean if this bill hasn't passed by then and reached the president's desk that another one has to be reintroduced at that point?
That's correct. Assuming we don't get this passed in the last week of Congress, which is probably a good assumption, I'll be reintroducing this bill. Unfortunately, Tulsi Gabbard is not coming back to Congress. So I'll be looking for somebody else on the other side of the aisle to co-sponsor this with me. In the past, I've been able to work with people like Zoe Lofgren, people like Mark Pocan, who's sponsored a very similar bill to this with me in the past. And I've already thought of some changes, that I would like to make to it, some improvements, if you will. On the whistleblower provision, I reread the bill and I see that it requires them to go to a member. If they want to blow the whistle to somebody in Congress, it has to be somebody on the Permanent Intelligence Select Committee. Well, the problem with that is you don't get on that select committee. It's called a select committee because Nancy Pelosi selects who goes on it. There's a problem right there. And on the Republican side, it's our leader who selects who the members of that are. I'm not on it. I'll probably never be invited on it because a lot of the staffers are former CIA or FBI. I mean, it's a revolving door on that committee. And some of the members of Congress are former and future members of the intelligence community. They pre-select people for that committee. And so what I want to do in a future bill is to say, if you're a duly elected senator or representative in the U.S. Congress, then anybody could blow the whistle to you. Because if I were a whistleblower, you know what I would do? I would watch all the interviews and I would say, which one of these folks can I trust? And I want a whistleblower to be able to pick which member of Congress. I don't want Nancy Pelosi to pick which member of Congress they can blow the whistle to.
Do you think that Speaker Pelosi will still be selecting members? That is, do you see her as being reelected as Speaker of the House in a couple of weeks?
Well, I was a part of 3 efforts to get rid of John Boehner, and the third one worked. So I've learned a little bit about how this can go down, and I will offer my services to any Democrat who is seeking to displace Nancy Pelosi from the Speaker's chair. Of course, we'll get another Democrat, but her margin is going to be slim. She can't afford to lose maybe 5 or 6 members of her conference on January 3rd when that vote happens.
And the last time around, I think she was short 10 Democrats. Well, there were 10 Democrats, I believe, last time around who did not vote for her, and I believe all 10 of those were reelected. So things seem a little icy for the Speaker.
Yeah, I think she's going to have a hard time herding all the cats because she can't afford to lose as many. And again, I'll be there willing to work with any of those Democrats that want to replace her and offering my services.
Okay, well, we'll be right back after this short break. Okay, we're back again with Congressman Thomas Massie. Congressman, thank you again for being with us.
Thanks for having me on, Christian.
So this past Christmas week, Congress passed the stimulus bill, to the tune of $900 billion. And, of course, the icing on the cake for this bill is the $600 checks that American citizens would be receiving in the near future, despite other provisions that are in the bill that isn't being talked a lot about. Can you tell us a bit about what's in the bill that most Americans may not be aware of that Congress passed?
Well, this is one of the biggest bills we've ever voted on. It was 5,500 pages. We had only a few hours to read it. We have a rule in Congress that we're supposed to have 72 hours to read it. Well, they suspended that rule by a majority vote of Congress and jammed this down our throats. We were frantically searching through this bill before it came to the floor, and I was able to highlight a few of the things that are attached to it. I say attached to it because there were things that aren't COVID relief that were attached to this bill.
Such as what?
Well, the whole omnibus bill was attached to this bill, like all of funding of government. And so one of the things in there that we were able to highlight, $700 million to Sudan. So if you want to vote for $600 checks to Americans who are in need, you have to also, in that same vote to send $700 million to Sudan. There were some things that are ridiculous. I'm not going to say borderline ridiculous. They're just blatantly ridiculous. $10 million for gender studies or gender programs in Pakistan. Like, why is that attached to the COVID relief bill? It shouldn't be attached to the COVID relief bill. But it's because I think this time they've created a bill that collapsed on itself. It was so big. It's almost like a supernova. It's a black hole. It got so big that people started looking at it and saying, why is this in here? Now, some of my colleagues are saying, oh, no, that $700 million to Sudan, that's part of a separate bill. Well, it started out as a separate bill, but it got merged into the COVID bill, and it's one big vote. And when my colleagues are trying to assure their constituents, oh, don't worry about it, that's not part of the COVID relief, the constituents are saying, well, why is it part of the omnibus? But the reality is it was all one vote. This is a tactic. In fact, it's two tactics that the swamp uses to get members of Congress to vote. They push these things all the way up until Christmas week. And they know that congressmen want to go home and be with their families. So they use that emotional tug of their families to incentivize them. And then the other thing they do is they put everything in one bill. I mean, there were pay raises for soldiers in this bill, okay? And so if you voted against this bill, they almost dare you. They'll get you in the meeting and they'll say, listen, if you vote against this bill, people are going to know that you voted against pay raises for soldiers. Well, I think the American people are sick and tired of having our soldiers taken hostage for these pet projects of the State Department, like $700 million to Sudan. I think the American people are sick and tired of their governors shutting down their economies and depriving them of jobs, and then the federal government saying, well, we're going to take your stimulus payment, your $600 hostage, and in order for that to pass, we're going to attach all this other junk to it.
Where do these amendments come from? I mean, is there a caucus in Congress, the pork barrel caucus, that's just injecting all this lunacy into these bills? I mean, how does this stuff get attached to these essential bills?
Well, the sad thing is this is par for the course on an omnibus bill. The goodie bag that's in there for all these other countries, that comes from the deep state. Look, I'm not going to pull any punches. That's the State Department. The State Department, 99% of those people working there were working there under Obama, and they're working there under Trump. And like I said, there's a revolving door with State Department staff and congressional staff. Like, they switch places. Oh, okay, I'll work in Congress. Now I'll go work in the State Department. Now I'll come back to the committee and I'll help write this bill. So, I mean, you might find some comfort if you thought there was a congressman inserting this language into these bills, but the reality is it's staff. And I call it part of the deep Congress, where, like, it doesn't matter who's in the majority. Like if it's Republicans or Democrats, if it's Nancy Pelosi or John Boehner, you'll find this stuff in these bills because it's inserted in there by, in the instance of foreign aid, it's inserted by the State Department.
So President Trump just said that $600 paychecks isn't enough and that he wants $2,000 paychecks going out to Americans. And Pelosi and Schumer have said they're on board with that. They're willing to do that. What do you make of Pelosi and Schumer saying that they are for another bill that would include $2,000 paychecks to Americans?
Well, I think President Trump is genuine on this. I think he would sign a bill if all it was $2,000 payments to individuals. But I don't think Schumer and Pelosi are being genuine on this. That to them, the $2,000, that's the cheese in the trap. And the trap is socialism and cronyism. And they're not going to let mice have cheese without walking into the trap. So, Pelosi has said, I'll pass this bill by unanimous consent on Christmas Eve and dare a Republican to come object to it. That's a bluff on her part, in my opinion. And she knows it would never pass the Senate, even if she did pass it in the House that way. They're not going to give up the cheese without trapping us into these other programs.
Do you think there's any appetite in Congress for passing a bill that reopens the country?
I like how you go from cheese to appetite.
Maybe I'm hungry.
I'm getting hungry, too.
For some liberty. So we need to get past that bill to repeal the Patriot Act.
I'm always starved for liberty, but can't get enough of it. But I think, ironically, what we're doing in Congress or proposing to do is going to encourage governors to keep the shutdowns going. Our governor here in Kentucky just shut down restaurants for 2 weeks. You couldn't even dine indoors. And if we, I'm sympathetic to the restaurants, but what they need is not a bailout package, not a PPP program. They need to open back up. And so the double-edged sword here is like, if you try to help those people by passing a federal bill to give them relief, then their governors say, see, I can keep doing this and I'll make people safer by shutting everybody down. So, I think we just need to put pressure on the governors to open things back up. And, why are we sending more money to schools that are shut down? Like in the stimulus package, we're sending additional funds to schools. Why would you do that if they're shutting down? And I know, I think, was it the president? Somebody got in trouble for saying it should be linked, that they're going to link the funding to actually going to work and being open. And I think you shouldn't get in trouble for that. I think that should be in these bills.
Didn't you tweet something recently about funding going to brick and mortar schools? Was it overseas that's in the stimulus bill when schools here are closed?
Yeah, we're not even sending our own kids to brick and mortar schools in a lot of parts of the country. Why would we have a stimulus package that's got money in it for brick and mortar schools overseas? I mean, that's how ridiculous it is when you start thinking about these things. One policy I adopted this morning in a tweet was that we should withhold the vaccine from members of Congress until they balance the budget. Now, for these members of Congress who've been here most of their lives and have one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel, I think they'd be balancing the budget next week to get that vaccine. Now, personally, I'm not going to take the vaccine. I've already had the virus, and there's no benefit to somebody who's had the virus to take the vaccine. But for some of these congressmen, that would be the strongest incentive. I mean, that would be more powerful than a constitutional amendment in terms of getting them to balance the budget.
It would be. Perhaps, of course, I think some of your colleagues have already taken the vaccine. I think we saw AOC, for example, making a big deal on her Instagram and social media page about how she took the vaccine already. So maybe next time around, we could try your idea.
I love how they argue that they need to take the vaccine because they're essential to the function of the government. But on March 27th, they argued that I guess they weren't that essential because they didn't want to show up for work and vote on bills. So I don't know if it'll get Democrats to actually start showing up to work. Maybe it's a good thing. There are 70 Democrats who regularly don't come to work. There are some Democrats haven't been there since March because voting by proxy. Maybe with this vaccine, they'll get brave enough to actually come back to work.
I was going to say, next time around, you shouldn't get any flack when you force all the members of Congress to come back to Congress to vote for a bill. If they've all got the vaccine, there's no worry about spreading COVID in the halls of Congress.
That's right. And just in closing, we fly shoulder to shoulder in these little metal tubes on airplanes to Congress. But when we get to Congress, we sit 3 seats apart. And the reason for that, Christian, is there's no C-SPAN on the airplane.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Congressman Massie. Take care. God bless. Merry Christmas.